Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Martin Short, Chief Executive Officer of the Power of Nutrition, Alan Jope, Chief Executive Officer for Unilever, and Jeff Oppenheim, Board Member of the Foreign Press Association.
Well, gentlemen, welcome. And by the way, if you are checking your program, I wasn't the original moderator, so don't get confused when you look at that name and my name. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be here with you, gentlemen, for sure. And I'm going to jump right in because we have such a deep conversation point to have here. And certainly we have Alan Jope here, and we have Martin Short, as you heard. And I want to jump in and really talk about something that's so timely. This morning, I don't know if you saw, there was even a New York Times article that talked about yesterday's climate change summit and deemed it rather unsuccessful. I don't know if you had time to look at the paper with all that you're doing, but thoughts, comments on that?
Well, I mean, climate is important, and I think that there may be some climate deniers out there, but at the end of the day, when I look at it from a nutrition perspective, agriculture, smart, and climate is something of the future that we have to embrace. And it's coming down the road. It's not something that we can ignore. And I think that we have to think through every opportunity that we can through partnerships, through smart use of the resources of the planet, and the fact that it's not a good article today, it'll be a good article tomorrow.
Love that. Alan?
Well, what a burden to have to come onto the stage after Jamila. She looks great, and what a message she's got about young people. And I must admit, I don't think yesterday's Climate Summit was unsuccessful or a failure, because we each can do small things. Our company, Unilever, just announced a couple days ago that we're now going to be 100% renewable energy on 5 continents in our operations. In fact, we are already. And we're not going to wait for government. We're working with our partners and our suppliers to make progress and impact the world for the future generations. And that's what we're here to talk about right now, is a health partnership.
Indeed, indeed. And we're talking about nutrition, we're talking about hygiene, of course, but so many of these issues interact with all the other SDGs, not just where we would normally put nutrition is, of course, zero hunger. I want to really get at the enormity of this project at large, if I may. Alan, do you want to speak to where we're going with this?
Sure. Unilever believes that for brands to remain relevant in the world, we need to have them take a position on things that matter more than shinier hair or soft skin or whiter clothes or tastier food. And we call these our purpose-led brands that are doing something to leave society or the planet in a little bit better shape than we found it.
Thank you.
Specifically in this instance, this program is one of our brands that many people here won't know. It's a brand called Lifebuoy, and it's an antibacterial soap that's largely sold in the emerging markets. And its mission is to stop the death of children under the age of 5 through very simple precautions against preventable diseases. Specifically, we know that hand washing with soap is an intervention that reduces child mortality by up to 50% from preventable diseases. So that brand is on an absolute mission to do that. And all of our brands that do something worthwhile in the world tend to do it in partnership. And Martin, why don't you talk about this particular partnership?
Okay, well, thank you, Alan. Well, the Power Nutrition is a charitable foundation. We're based in the UK, and obviously it'll surprise nobody here that given the name, we're quite focused on nutrition. So thinking through the 11 interventions, the Lancet-based, the so-called evidence-based interventions that we do, hand washing with soap is one of those 11. And we believe very passionately in partnering with the private sector. The Power Nutrition in of itself is never going to make soap or hand washing with soap an aspirational either product or an activity. That is, I think, the domain of the private sector. So we see this operation that we will have with Unilever, in particularly Gujarat, but then will spread into a number of different countries, as absolutely critical of getting the actual resources and skills that the private sector can bring to the table and ensure that is embedded in the health systems with all the messaging around it. So we're very excited about that.
Martin, talk a little bit too of the model. The funding model to me is very intriguing. It's not unfamiliar, each component of it, to nonprofits. It's sort of the common matching grant proposal that we know very well in nonprofits, but it also seems to combine a little bit of the collective resource that may be closer to crowdsourcing, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, the Power of Nutrition has developed some bilateral relationships with major donors and philanthropies and the private sector, where for every $1 million that we are able to attract to our platform, we guarantee a 4x model. So we'll have another $3 million, which is going to be added to that, so that when Alan and his team come on board, that we can promote that hand washing with soap to a much greater amplification than they can do in of themselves, and we can do this through our platform, and therefore in the Gujarat program that we're rolling out together, we're going to reach over 1.7 million women.
Oh, significant.
Huge.
We had a wonderful seminar yesterday here at Concordia that addressed plant-based food and moving in that direction. One of the take-homes from that was constantly from a perspective of, even well-meaning, we sometimes go into a culture and forget to honor what is already on the ground and be respectful of that. So if I can put that to both of you gentlemen as you move forward in this project in India, how are you advancing that, being sensitive to everything that is there and adapting your program to them?
One element of this program is that we're going to use, can you believe it, digital technology to reach media dark parts of rural India. And the way we're able to do that is that whilst broadcast media may not reach those villages, almost all the women that we're trying to reach do have a feature phone. So specifically not a smartphone, but a feature phone. And these women are time rich, but content poor. And if they give us a call and hang up and leave a missed call, then we will call them back. And for the women who have got young kids, or more importantly, the women who are expecting children, we will share with them content, and embedded in the content are half a dozen of the important principles that Martin's organization drives to ensure that their kids don't suffer from malnutrition. One of those 6 elements is washing your hands with soap. Because to put it technically, if you've got diarrhea, you don't absorb your nutrients.
You're focusing in small part, but why is this, on the larger part, a great investment for all of our future?
Well, I'm glad you used the word investment, actually. I mean, just because we're philanthropy, I don't think you discard the principles of business or the laws of economics. I think you should look at this as an investment. I think that Unilever looks at it as an investment in the power of nutrition, and we certainly look at them as investment partners. Investing in children is actually a pretty good idea. I mean, we've got 150 million children in the world under 5 who are stunted. 150 million. Now, hand washing with soap is just one of those interventions that can help to alleviate that. The important thing is that not all those children, unfortunately, are able to be reached, and therefore they will ultimately morph in some way into stunted adults. And stunted adults are embedded in the workforce, and if you're embedded in the workforce with a stunting, which is an affliction of body and brains, you're going to have open to non-communicable diseases, absenteeism, and all the aspects of driving costs through the business and the value chain. So from our perspective, and I think from Alan's perspective, Unilever, you can reduce that cost to not just society, not just to the country, but to the individual businesses that are running. I think that must be a fantastic opportunity to address this terrible affliction.
You also cite that 45% of children's deaths are attributed to nutrition. Undernutrition. Now, make that difference for us, too, because I think so many of us are used to malnutrition.
Yeah.
I think it's years of sort of hearing that languaging, but you make a distinct difference, you explaining to me.
Well, I mean, malnutrition is like an umbrella, and underneath that umbrella you'll have obesity, you'll have stunting and wasting is put together in the undernutrition category. We focus on that particular category. That's not to say that obesity isn't important and isn't actually vital that we address that, but that's not something that we particularly focus on, although I must be saying that there are many children in the world who have what we call the double burden, and that is they're both stunted, In other words, they've got an affliction of body and brain, and they are also obese. So a double tragedy when these individual children who are not given the right nutrients then get given the wrong type of calorie, and it is just calorific rather than nutrient intense, and therefore they are obese and they suffer from stunting. But that is a differentiation that we use.
It's amazing to me with these hard statistics too that really show this issue of nutrition. It still tends to be one of the most poorly funded issues. What do you attribute that to?
Well, I mean, first of all, there's no Ministry of Nutrition, and I don't advocate for one, but therefore it seems to be a pass between agriculture, education, women and girls' agenda, adolescence. It doesn't have a natural home. But we see nutrition as the base on which all those particular ministries sit. You get nutrition right, you will ultimately, your dollars are going to go further in development and further in terms of Alan's product, in terms of people are going to have better disposable incomes if they can hold down better jobs. So nutrition hasn't been well funded. Less than 1% of aid, global aid, goes to nutrition. I mean, that is a travesty in of itself. So I think that we're very, very focusing on the business opportunity that something like addressing undernutrition can have, rather than the moral imperative. I think we've got to move that argument away from the moral imperative into that space of a business opportunity. You get these adults into the workforce who are really healthy, you're going to have a better business and you're going to have a better GDP.
Now, this is nothing new, as you mentioned, for Unilever by any means. I mean, you have had a lot of Sustainability for Life, I think, which was a campaign focused on 2010, which I think you inherited and even reshaped for the next generation. Talk about some of these programs at large, too.
Look, you don't have a healthy business if you don't have a healthy society and a healthy planet. And that is hardwired into our organization. When William Lever founded Unilever 140 years ago, he described the purpose of the firm as to make cleanliness commonplace and lessen the load on women. So he was a feminist 140 years ago, and that silver thread of trying to do business in a way that leaves society and the planet a little bit better off is something that's been part of our DNA ever since. We brought it to life more vigorously 8 years ago with something called the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, which sets some extraordinarily ambitious goals, and we're about to wrap that up and lay out a new set of brutally ambitious targets for water, waste, carbon, living wages, and so on. So we're very up for business as a force for good in the world.
Well, you gentlemen are certainly doing your part, each on your end. I would say, what's the challenge to us to close with? What would you put out to us, either as individuals or with the companies that we represent, the NGOs we might represent, and or the governments we might represent?
One word: collaboration. The biggest system change, the biggest impact is going to come from private sector, civil society, and government working in concert. And that's why events like Concordia are really important. The convening power of bringing those multi-party stakeholders together, that's how really big change happens.
Terrific.
Well, we've got the SDGs coming around the corner, and it's it's right in front of us. And I think, as Alan says, we're not going to get there without partnership and collaboration. And I can tell everybody in this room, if anybody thinks we're going to get to the goals of the SDGs without the private sector, I think that we're smoking something and past the matches, because that's not going to happen. So I think the collaboration, the partnership, partnership and collaboration are words that development throws around all the time. But I can tell you it's incredibly difficult to do, but incredibly gratifying when you do it. I think that without the private sector, the private sector creates jobs. Governments don't create jobs. We've got to realize that is the backbone of actually putting disposable income into people's pockets to alleviate poverty, which will have that as part of the SDGs. So I think I would agree entirely with Alan on that. But collaboration and the private sector engagement, critical.
Well, regretfully, gentlemen, we're out of time, I see. But thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Concordia.
Thank you.
Thank you.